In light of the trend of transmania and woke and politically correct culture, those on the conservative traditionalist side are keen on throwing terms like gender cult. This gender cult they speak of is that of the gender subjectivism, the denial of organic attributes of sex, and divorcing the metaphysical and behavioral aspects of sex from the biological real world component, which progressives would like to call the sex assigned at birth. It's not that they're necessarily wrong here, calling this a gender cult, the conservatives. It is, albeit a specialized reactionary one that professes to rebel against gender norms, supposedly. Ironically enough, it relies on stereotyped ideas about gender to then say that they're defying it. What I want to address is the idiocy of those who claim to be fighting this gender cult, namely the hypocrisy of calling it a gender cult when they, as neo-traditionalists, are likely to indulge and take for granted a gender cult of their own, which is more massive and has a bigger, more long-standing history than even feminism itself. Gynocentrism and gyneolatry contain qualities in every way attributable to an actual gender cult. The fact that it actually gave way to feminism, which in turn gave way to the political transgender ideology, is evident, but conveniently ignored too often by these conservatives. They don't want to address it because as practitioners of the gynocentric gender cult, they are either dependent on it to keep the approval of the immediate women in their lives, as well as the public, the women in the public, or suffer from a serious normalized case of Stockholm syndrome. Anyway, to the heart of the subject of this video. The gender cult that the traditional conservative promotes and refuses to denounce. Men are expected to die in wars, while the royal class of women are subject to protection by these men. That is a gender cult. Men are expected, from the point of courtship until well after the divorce, to financially and in effect materially provide for womankind. That is a gender cult. Men are expected, at days of age, to have a crucial component of their genitalia ripped off, despite risk of infection, physical complications that could follow, and death, as well as guaranteed psychological trauma manifesting itself at various degrees later in life, for the sake of anywhere from Sandra Bullock's, Oprah's, and Kate Beckinsale's facial creams to the depraved whims of women sexually attracted to broken manhood. That's a gender cult. Circumcision of baby boys is a gender cult. Women are regarded as the equivalent of nature, designated as the big choosers, and the men are the vassals that must commit degrading acts of altruism to earn their attention, despite the fact that men and women are both choosers and members of nature together. This one-sided attitude is a gender cult. Families, in particular in North America, favor supporting daughters after adulthood, whereas men are generally kicked out of the house when they reach the age of 18, expected to fend for themselves because a man should take care of himself, quote unquote. Else he gets shamed as a dweller in their parents' basement with no life, that's what they like to say. Women categorically reject men at the slightest hint of him receiving assistance in any such way, in the dating market, for instance. I call that a gender cult. To engage in romance with a woman, he must first place himself in a position of self-degradation, of bending his knee in front of a woman and present her with a hunk of rock, which may or may not be a blood diamond, that he has spent a ridiculous amount of his fortune on. What is either a curt rejection and no regard further by the woman as to the trouble the man went through, or if she did accept it, then the wedding will be even more of a fortune lost on his part, and it will be again when the divorce follows, which happens at this point too often to not consider an event to expect and practically schedule. Either way, a royal woman looks down at vassal man. That's the image of the man going on his knee and proposing. That is a gender cult. Violence against men, especially by women, is subject to laughter. The very act of entertaining the idea of violence against women, especially by men, is grounds for ostracism at best, violent retribution at worst. Self-defense is not tolerated even if the man is faced with a rabid, crazed, blade-wielding, unhinged psycho woman on a rampage. That is a gender cult. Happy wife, happy life. If mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. Placing women on the status of maniacal ruler whose whims must be satisfied else the man's existence is not justified. That is a gender cult. To the traditional conservatives out there, and anyone who professes to ally with feminists and other misandrists just so they can own the transgender cult, this video is for you. The gender cult, which you profess to wage war on, is but a fad compared to the grander gender cult that is gynocentrism that you take for granted and bask in. I'll close on something that I want you to get through to your head. Gynocentrism is a gender cult. It is the biggest such cult. Gyneolatry is woman worshipping in this gender cult. Bio-gynocentrism is the means of rationalizing it with the alleged argument from biology and evolution in this gender cult. Male disposal is the end goal of this gender cult. Gynocentrism is a gender cult.